Hey everybody, it's Felisa. Today is going to be another entry into Spotlight Sunday where I highlight cases of the missing, lost, and endangered, particularly those of African American women. Today's case is going to be a compilation of information from the charlieproject.org and another online source, ourblackgirls.com, as well as other various news outlets. I'll leave some of those links in the description box below. Today's profile is going to be on Dr. Cherryl Pearson, who was a pediatrician working in the Memphis, Tennessee area at the time of her disappearance. She has been missing since January 5th, 2002 from Bartlett, Tennessee. Her classification is endangered missing, and her date of birth was given as August 21st, 1964. She would be 56 now, and at the time of her disappearance, she was 37. Her height and weight was given as between 5'6" and 5'7" and 160 pounds. She has black hair, brown eyes. She has a long, dark-colored birthmark on the side of her face, and she also has a small sixth finger on each hand. Both of her ears are pierced. It also was stated that she suffers from type 1 diabetes and she required insulin for it. When she disappeared, she left behind her insulin pump and all her other diabetic supplies. Earlier in the day, Cherryl had attended a Memphis Grizzlies game in Memphis, Tennessee, and she was a season ticket holder and she loved to go to the games. She left the venue around 10:30 p.m. and she went home to her house in Bartlett, where she spent time with one of her friends, Andrea Fox. Andrea said that she was at the house and Cherryl was acting very normally. As a matter of fact, there was nothing abnormal about any of Cheryl's behavior that whole evening. She said she did mention that her sister was going to work early the next morning and that she was going to drop off the kids. She loved the kids and she loved to spend a lot of time with them, and she was very excited to see them in the morning. At around 1 a.m., Andrea left Cheryl's house, and Cherryl has never been seen or heard from again. The following morning, Cheryl's sister went to the house with the children and saw that neither Cheryl nor her car was there. And because Cherryl is a severe diabetic, there were concerns that there may have been a medical emergency, and perhaps she tried to drive herself to the hospital, had an accident, and maybe was in dire straits or having really in need of medical attention. So the family called the police. The family also passed out flyers in their local community and beyond, and soon the police checked Cheryl's phone records and noticed something odd. At about 1:58, about an hour after Andrea, left Cheryl's house, Cheryl got a phone call from a payphone that was located at a convenience store not far from Cheryl's house. It seemed that Cheryl was home and she answered the call, and that call only lasted 5 seconds, though. The detective said that when they searched Cheryl's house, they found her phone and her pager sitting on the table. And incidentally, she was on call that evening, so she would have had to have those with her. So let me just recap for a minute. She got a phone call. Phone call only lasted for 5 seconds. I don't know what in the world you say in 5 seconds, but okay, she answered the phone. Phone only lasted 5 seconds. And then the thought is that she left the house, but she left the house without the phone and the pager. Even though she was on call, she would have had to have gotten into her car and driven to wherever, but she did so again without her phone, without her pager, without her diabetic supplies, without anything, oddly. So that just struck me as very, very odd. There weren't any signs of struggle in the house, but the police didn't rule out the possibility that she could have been taken by force. So there could have been somebody that called and then showed up at the house and forced her to leave, which to me sounds very plausible if maybe they showed up with a weapon and, she wasn't trying to get hurt, because she literally left with nothing except for her car, which, kind of brings me to the next thing. Did the person that came, if somebody came and abducted her or first forced her out, did they then force her into a car? Did the person arrive on foot? This convenience store was not far from Cheryl's house, so it could have been that the person called, saw that she was home, which, yeah, I mean, I'm, kind of balking at that because if they called her on her cell phone, how would they know that she was home? So maybe this was her house phone that the person called on. It's not very clear. But let's assume that the person called the house phone, she picked up, was enough for the person to believe that she was home. And then they started off over to the house, arrived at her door. And, that's when perhaps forcing her out into her own car would have happened. That sounds really plausible to me. At any rate, days later, the investigators did find the car that Cheryl was driving, and that was at a nearby apartment complex. Her keys, $140 in cash inside of an envelope, and her medical bag that contained her personal belongings were found locked inside of the trunk. That led the police to believe that nothing was stolen and that Cheryl must have been a victim of foul play. Even more puzzling was that the car had been cleaned to perfection. It had been detailed so thoroughly that no fingerprints were found inside or out, not even those belonging to Cheryl. As expected, anyone who came in contact with Cheryl was questioned, including her brother-in-law, Chuck Hildreth. She had a brother-in-law, this particular brother-in-law, Chuck, with a criminal history of bank robbery. And that's what the police said. And so he was interviewed, and they've taken statements from him. There were some inconsistencies that weren't explainable. And additionally, Cheryl named her sister as the beneficiary to an insurance policy worth $150,000. This was the same sister married to the brother-in-law in question. Hildreth reportedly has an alibi for the time Cheryl went missing, and there's no evidence linking him to her disappearance. Now, that was an interesting twist. When I first read it, I thought, okay, so was this the same sister? Because it's not clear again, and I'm speculating, and I don't want to go too far in the weeds because it's not my intention to disparage any of the family members. But I'm just trying to get a clear understanding of who is who. So was this the sister that went over to the house with the kids that was expecting her to babysit, or was this another sister? And if, this whoever sister was the beneficiary on the policy, was this something that they had previously discussed? It was obviously known that she was the beneficiary because the sister would have had to have signed off on it or have known about it, and perhaps the husband knew about it too. Now, I don't want to ever make a direct correlation or a link or, a suggestion that just because you are guilty of one crime that you have a propensity and an ability to commit another crime. However, we do have to be realistic and say that, it could be a possibility that desperate times calls for desperate measures. And if you are robbing banks, it probably is a fair assumption that you are desperate for money, and perhaps that need for money will drive you to do different things. Whatever the case may be, the police have not named Chuck Hildreth as a suspect, and it is widely reported that he has denied any involvement in her disappearance. The NBC News further reported that when speaking about Chuck with Cheryl's parents, they stated that they didn't believe that he was involved with their daughter's disappearance. Her parents, Leon and Hazel Pearson, also shared in 2006 that they didn't believe that their daughter was alive. In 2009, Leon Pearson passed away, and that was the same year that Cheryl was declared legally dead. Her parents have contributed to a $41,000 reward fund, hoping that someone will come forward with information about what happened to her. I will leave the link for that hotline below. But as of right now, there hasn't been any updates or any leads that have been worth pursuing, I'm assuming, for the police, and they're probably at a stalemate. This story, again, is super baffling, super disturbing, because we don't know what happened between the hours of 1 a.m. and it doesn't even say what time Cheryl's sister showed up. But let's say that if she had to work early, maybe she had to be at work at 6 or 7. So she showed up with the kids around that time. So in 5, and not even 5 hours, because remember she got a phone call at 1:58. So about 2 o'clock in the morning, she gets this phone call. So between 2 and approximately 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, she just disappears off the face of the earth. 1 5-second phone call is probably the biggest clue that we have in all of this. The idea that she was probably the one that drove away from the house, because I just don't see that, if you leave your home and you have a vehicle, that you don't take your vehicle, um, and you just leave on foot. Even if she had a diabetic episode, she wouldn't have gotten very far walking, and it's highly likely that she would have encountered someone that would have recognized that she was having a medical emergency and would have called for medical support or call the hospital or the police or something along those lines. So in my head, it's more probable that whoever called her on her landline at home, knew that she was home, went over to the house on foot, she probably opened the door because she knew who it was, and then that person has all of the rest of the story for this. I believe that she was taken, and I believe that she was forced to drive somewhere with against her will. And then from there, anyone knows, unfortunately. It's really hard to believe that there's no one on the face of the earth that knows what happened to her, or has any insight or any, tidbit of information that could probably break this case wide open. I'm sure that there's someone out there that saw something, but they just don't know what they saw. So, just to recap, this case is about Dr. Cherryl Pearson. She disappeared from her home in Bartlett, Tennessee in 2002. She is a Black female, black hair, brown eyes. She has a dark colored birthmark on the side of her face. That alone would be distinguishing. She also has a small sixth finger on each hand. That too would be distinguishing. She was 37 when she went missing, and she would be 56 years old today. Although she was legally declared dead in 2009, I still believe that her loved ones, those that survived her disappearance, and those that are still looking for her, deserve answers. So if you saw something on January 5th, 2002, and it struck you as odd, but you kind of filed it away because you didn't know what you were looking at, please get in contact with the police and share what you saw. It may be nothing, but it also may be everything. I'm Felisa, and I hope that you have enjoyed this presentation. We send prayers to the family of Dr. Cherryl Pearson, and it is my sincere hope that we will be able to provide some information to the Bartlett Police Department that would allow them to bring Cherryl home. Thank you. Good night.